you are worth that, of course you should be charging that. If you're not worth that, maybe not, but you need to understand what is the value that you bring. Welcome back to Build Your Business with Brittany, the real estate agent training series where we turn hustle into closings and knowledge into confidence. I'm Brittany Handura, real estate agent, coach, and investor, and I'm here to make real estate easy for you. I want to help you build a business you love and a life you're proud of. Let's dive in and level up your real estate game starting now. So today we're talking about contracts that close, avoid costly mistakes, and win more deals. We're specifically talking about working with buyers today. It's more important than ever to make sure that we understand what we're doing when we're working with buyers, talking to buyers, having those kind of conversations, because now, of course, we have to get the buyer representation, and so we have to make sure that we are comfortable and confident having those conversations. So what our class is looking like is a little bit different today, and we're basically just gonna jump right in. We're gonna talk about what are some key questions that we should know. We need to understand our value. What is it that we're bringing to our buyers? And so we need to understand some key questions and be able to answer them. A little bit later, we're going to jump into the actual document, the BRBC, and be able to fill that out and know what we're talking about so that when we show it to our clients, we're not like bumbling and fumbling like I was today. So key questions that we need to be able to answer. What is your value? So we always talk about this because a lot of times I've actually heard agents say, what is my value? Why am I charging all of this money? Why am I getting paid this commission that in some people's mind is like an exorbitant fee, but in other people's minds, like mine, I say, well, if you are worth that, of course you should be charging that. If you're not worth that, maybe not, but you need to understand what is the value that you bring. So we always talk about what's your value proposition. So what's like your elevator pitch? What is it that you bring to the table? You also have to understand what is your unfair advantage. So we talk about this all the time. Everybody has an unfair advantage. What is it that's yours? Is it that you speak another language? Is it that you have kids and you're part of that school system? Is it that you're part of the same church? Is it that you volunteer at the same places? What is it that's your unfair advantage? And how can you build that in to helping to share your value and your value proposition? So part of what my value is that I'm a real estate agent, coach, and investor. So I work with agents all day, every day, talking about how to get their offers accepted, how to work with clients, how to get things going, how to negotiate, how to move things forward, how to get to the close. And so that's part of what is my value proposition because I'm able to get my clients to the close. I am still an active real estate agent, and so I am working with clients just like you guys. And then I'm also an investor myself, so I understand cash flow, I understand the ROI, I understand what investors are looking for. So because of all of these things, that's part of what the value that I bring is. So what is it that is your value? I would say understanding your value is less about being able to talk about it and more about being able to internalize it. Of course, if you can talk about it, you're internalizing it better. But you have to understand what it is that you bring so that you can tell people, yes, I charge X amount and I'm good for it, basically. I know that I am worth this because I know the value that I bring. Remember, we're not just tour guides. We're not just taking people around, showing people houses. We're helping them through this huge transaction that typically is the largest financial transaction that your clients are going to have. And so you're helping them step by step to understand this. You're advising them and you're helping them to understand what the next process is and is this a good decision for them and their family. So often people equate real estate agents to like a used car salesman, which I hate because I'm not a used car salesman. I don't like used car salesmen. They're, like sleazy and gross and nobody likes that. So I don't want people to think of me like that. I want people to think of me more along the lines of a financial advisor or an advisor who's helping them understand their their assets and what's going to happen and how to work through this transaction. So understanding your value is key to that. So as we think about today, what is it that is your value? How can you talk to your buyers specifically so that you know what you're bringing to them? So, one of the things too for me, part of my value is that I was in education for 20 years. And so one of my key things that I always provide is that education piece. I love to do this kind of thing up here, not just with agents, but also with my clients. And so that's part of what my value is that I'm not trying to sell them. I'm not trying to sell them on a house. If they don't want it, they don't want it. I am trying to sell them on working with me. But the way that I'm doing that is by, like Martin said, providing. I'm providing that education, I'm providing knowledge, understanding, and that's part of my value. Number 2, when do you need to have your clients sign a buyer representation agreement? Okay, so this is another good question. I don't know how it is in Canada, but in California, we are probably the most strict out of anybody. So we need to have our clients sign a buyer representation agreement before we enter into any kind of agency with them. And what that means practically is when we are actually showing them properties, we need to have a buyer's agreement signed. So if we're just sending them properties on the MLS, or if you're a listing agent and you're showing a property for your seller, you do not need to have a buyer representation agreement signed. So if you're just showing, if you're just throwing it out to your social media, if you're just putting them on an MLS drip, or if you are just showing property for your seller, you don't need to have an agreement signed. If you say, hey, I'm showing property for my seller, so buyer, you're coming unrepresented, come see this property, and they say, this one isn't for me, but I still want to work with you. Can you show me that house down the street? Now you have to have a buyer representation agreement signed. So if you go outside of whatever house you're selling, once you're not working for your sellers anymore and you start working for them as an agent, as their buyer representative, that's when you need to have your buyer's agreement signed. So I just had a story for you and it's leaving my brain. I can't think of it. Oh, I do have a story for you. So I actually just got an offer on one of my listings yesterday, and the buyer representation agreement said it was signed that day or the day before. Whatever it was signed the day that they had submitted the offer. I automatically was thinking, well, that's weird. And then the agent told me, they've seen 12 other houses at least, and this is the only one they want to submit an offer on. And I said, well, you can't show 12 houses in one day. So how did this all work? So what I think happened, number one, this is one of the ways that you can tell a lack of experience is because they're not following the rules. So that one of the things that I always talk about is your contracts, how you write your contracts tells a story. And so this is telling me a story. She's writing the contract. There were a couple other things that I noticed in the contract that were missing or she had done in a non-typical way that told me she's not very experienced in this, which is okay. That's not a bad thing. A lot of the agents I work with are not experienced in this. What we need to do is make sure we're connecting with people who are experienced to help check our work or whatever. Anyway, I digress. So what that tells me, because she had gotten that agreement signed that day, is that she either didn't have an agreement with her clients beforehand, and she was just showing them property when she shouldn't have been, or it's that she had an agreement for a lower amount. She had an agreement for, let's say, 2.5%, but she's asking us for 3%, and so she wanted to get that higher amount. So what you should do in this case is you should always write in the BRBC the higher amount that you want, even if you're saying, hey, we're going to ask for this higher amount, but if they don't offer that, I'm going to take whatever they give me or whatever. I'm going to take 2.5%, whatever it is. And you just have to do a modification at that point. So that did tell me, like I'm starting to put the pieces of this puzzle together. Either she doesn't know what's going on, and so she's doing it wrong. She's not filling it out correctly, or she's trying to get a higher amount. And so she's just saying, just sign this today. So either way, that is not the way to do it. You need to have your agreement signed the day that your agency begins. Cindy, question. Before we continue, I want to remind you that if you're looking for even more real estate resources like an open house roadmap or a social media content calendar, then click the freebie link below because I have all kinds of resources to make real estate easy for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's jump back in. Yeah, you still have, so Cindy's saying she went over for a listing appointment and he said, oh, by the way, I also want to see some of these other houses. And she said, well, I have to get you to sign the buyer representation agreement first. And he said, okay, fine, I'll wait, and was able to do that. Now, what I would say,
because, it was the same day the buyer broker agreement was signed plus the offer.
But you had only seen one house or a couple, like,
She's interested in that one property.
if that agent had told me, this is the first house they saw and they loved it, they want to put an offer, or we saw 3 houses today and this is the one they want, I would have said, yeah, it's feasible that they could have signed it that day. But because she told me we've seen 12 other houses. The other thing she was telling me was that, okay, I'm an oversharer. She was an extreme oversharer. She's telling me I'm a flight attendant and the pilots give me their Wi-Fi so I can be checking texts and going over this stuff, and don't worry, if they spill a coffee, I'm gonna get you a new one. And I was like, what are you telling me right now? I'm hearing that you're not available. You're not here very often. You are up in the air and not available to help, which is fine for my purposes as the listing agent. But if I had 5 other offers, I'm probably not going to choose that one because of all the things that she's telling me. Now, she is in luck because I did not have any other offers, so I said, let's make this happen. But remember, your contract tells a story, what you're talking about tells a story, but you also want to build good rapport. One of the things we'll talk about is make sure to pick up the phone and talk to the other side of the transaction. You want to build a good rapport. You want to have some type of relationship with these people, because as much as I'm saying, okay, I'm getting a lot of this information, I was saying, she's sweet, she's nice, we could do this transaction together. It can be, we can make it happen. But I also know I'm gonna have to be the one who's kind of like steering the ship here. I'm gonna have to do a lot on both sides of this transaction, even though she's the one who's representing them. So because I know that she's probably a little inexperienced, she's busy because she's a flight attendant, and she is kind of off her rocker, but we love that. All right, so when do you need to have your client signed? Before your agency begins. Now, I also do say, what I was gonna say, Cindy, to you, you're saying you have to come to the office, print it out, then do that. I do everything digitally. So anytime I have them sign anything, I'll send it to them right then. So I might have a printout, like usually I do have a printout just to go over and say, here's what we're talking about, but it's usually just the grid. So for whatever, the listing agreement or the buyer representation agreement, I just print out the grid so I can say, here's what we're looking at, here are the important things, make sure that this is right, let's write this in, blah, blah, blah. If I'm not able to do something right then and there, I say, go ahead and initial this for me, and I'm gonna send you a DocuSign. But what I would love to do is say, let me go ahead and send it to you right now so that you can go on your computer or go on your phone and make sure it's working right, so that I can have them sign it right then and there, and if there are any issues or kinks, we can work it out. But sometimes Wi-Fi is not working, it's weird, and so I say, go ahead and sign this. As soon as I get back to the office, I'm gonna send it over to you. But I do everything digitally. So I would say almost without exception, I do everything digitally. There are a few exceptions, like when I have somebody who is like completely computer illiterate, then I will do a printed out thing. But if they're even a little bit, like if they can text, then I tell them you can do DocuSign. Let's figure it out. Let me help you with it, because it's going to be so much easier. So I have somebody who just called me for a listing yesterday, and he was telling me, I'm 80-something years old. I'm an old man. Who knows when I'm going to drop dead? I was like, okay. And I'm thinking, surely he does not text. And so I said, do you text? Can I send you a confirmation of, whatever? And he said, absolutely, I text. So I was like, okay, great. Let's do it. So you never know. All right, number 3. What happens if your buyer can't pay the compensation? So this is the question that's come up, because now, of course, we know that the seller pays the seller agent compensation. The buyer is responsible for the buyer agent compensation. That doesn't mean that the buyer has to pay. That just means that the buyer can ask the seller to pay their buyer agent fee. They can ask them for a credit to pay it. They can ask them for different things. And 98% of the time still, I would say, in our area, the seller is still paying that buyer agent fee. It's just the way I always explain it is it used to be that it was figured out at the time of the listing agreement. Now it's figured out at the time of the offer. When the RPA comes in, that's when we're deciding how much is the buyer agent getting paid. But in general, the seller is still paying for it. Have you seen that in your business and stuff? Are the sellers still paying for it?
Seller's still paying for it.
Yeah.
I haven't had a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But one of the things that your clients are signing now is saying that your compensation is X, whatever it is, 35%. Whatever you want your compensation to be, it's all negotiable. Your buyer is saying, yes, I agree to this. One of the things they're also signing is either saying, we're going to ask the seller for it. That's in the RPA. We're asking the seller to pay your buyer agent compensation, or there is a box check that says the buyer doesn't have any funds for this. So you as the agent know ahead of time the buyer has no funds to pay you as a buyer's agent. So what do you do at that point? You can say, well, I'm not going to work with you if I'm not going to get paid. Or you can still say, okay, let's still keep looking, because 98% of the time, really 100% of the time that I've seen, the seller's agents are still paying for that. And then what we say is that, hey, if we get to the point where the seller's agent isn't going to pay, then we can come back and have this conversation about how are you going to pay. But the agreement is that I'm going to get paid X. So it's not that you have to have the buyer pay and they have to have the cash and all of that. You just have to have the conversation. And it's a good time to have the conversation of, most of the time the seller pays. If they don't, what are we going to do? That's when we talk about the negotiation and all that kind of stuff. So along those same lines, when we talk about, is the seller going to pay, I also want to let them know, and I talk to the sellers in the same way, that it really all comes down to the offers that you get in. If we just had an agent in the office who had 5 offers that came in on his listing, and so now you're in a competitive spot. So now what are these offers going to do? Maybe, and what we saw in like 2020, 2021, people were like waiving all contingencies. They were saying it's as good as cash. I'll give you my firstborn, everything. They were just doing anything to get into the house. It's not the same these days, but we could get back to that, because we are seeing an uptick in the buyers coming to the market. And if we still have really low inventory like we've been having, it's going to be even more competitive. So once it gets competitive, that's when people potentially will start throwing things out like, we don't need a buyer agent compensation. And then the buyer is responsible for that compensation. So it really just depends. It's the same thing as saying, hey, instead of asking for a seller credit, we're not going to ask for any seller credit. We're going to give you over your asking amount. So it's the same kind of compensation. And when I'm talking to my sellers, I tell them we are looking at nothing but net. We're looking just at the net amount. So if somebody comes in and is offering way more, but they're saying, but pay for my buyer's compensation. Or if somebody's coming in and offering less and they're saying, but we're going to waive our buyer's compensation, well, we're just looking at the net. What is that going to end up being for you? What are you going to walk away with in your pocket? That is what the point is. So it really depends on the offers that come in. So if you get into a situation with your buyer like that, it's the same conversation. We just have to say, what is it that you're willing to put down? What is your loan going to be? If you're paying cash, what is it going to be? It's the same conversation that we're having. We're just doing it when we're submitting the offer based on the conversation that we're having with the listing agent. If they tell us we have no other offers, the sellers are looking at all offers, that tells us, okay, then I can probably get in with a agent, the seller's probably still willing to pay that agent compensation fee. Cindy, did you have a question? So the conversation is if the seller says, no, I'm not going to pay, what would you do with your buyer client? It totally depends on that buyer client. If they don't have any money and they say, no, there's no way I can afford this, and you're saying, well, there are other houses that will pay that, because the buyer is still responsible to pay you. You're not working for free. And so you can have that situation where you can say, okay, great, let's go find another house that will pay me. Otherwise, how are we going to work this out? It depends on the actual situation. So I would say, okay, maybe we can ask for a seller credit, and instead, because the buyers are able to take a credit and do it toward closing costs, toward whatever, and they can say, all right, I'm going to give that to you as a seller credit. That you can say, you can lower your compensation if you wanted to do that. I don't recommend that, because then you don't want to get into that habit. But depending on the relationship you have with them and all of that kind of stuff, you can choose to do whatever you want, because it's all negotiable. Or you can say, like maybe you can lower your down payment, and you can structure it in a lot of different ways. It's really just about the conversation of how are we going to get to this point. And a lot of times I think the buyers would say, well, we can't afford it, because it's the same thing as like paying closing costs. If you can't pay closing costs, you can't afford it. If you can't pay the down payment, you can't afford it. If you can't make the monthly payments, you can't afford it. So even if you really, really want this house, if you can't afford it, it's all in the closing costs. And, all of that money is wrapped up in the same type of thing. So it's really just a matter of, if they want that house, I'm not going to say, oh, I don't need to get paid. We're going to work it out in some way. But it totally depends on what do they actually have, and is it all structured? Like, are they putting 20% down and maybe they could put a little bit less down? Is it, or is it that they're putting 3.5% and that is all they have? At that point, I would say, this isn't the house for you then. We would work that out. All right, and number 4, how do I know if the seller is offering compensation? So remember the little button in the MLS that said how much the seller was offering in compensation? That has gone away. But it does say, is the seller willing to offer compensation, yes or no? And that can be left blank. So sometimes you have no idea. So the answer to this is, how do I know? Is you have to pick up the phone and talk to the agent. Because if, again, they have 27 offers and half of them are saying, we'll waive the buyer compensation, the seller may have been willing to offer it. But if now they have a bunch of offers saying, no, I don't need to pay it, of course they're going to take that, Who wouldn't? So it all depends on the specific circumstance. So you have to pick up the phone and talk to the other agent, because otherwise, how are you going to know? Even if you try and text with them back and forth, it's so easy for them to not say anything. By the way, I just had a conversation with another agent who was telling me, well, I can't tell what the other offers are. But that is not true. We know this, right? That in the offer or in your listing agreement, it is saying that you're able to basically negotiate on your seller's behalf, unless your seller does not want you to tell the other side what is happening. But the sellers have to opt into that. Otherwise, the default is absolutely you can share this information. Now, it's up to you to determine what's the best way to negotiate that. Because is the best way to say, submit your best and highest? I almost always think the answer to that is no. That's not going to be the best way to negotiate. You're not going to get the highest amount for your seller. So what I think as a listing agent would be better is, depending on the offers that you get, you can tell them, yes, they're over asking price. Yes, they're 50,000 over asking price, 100,000 over asking price. They're almost at asking price. You don't have to be exact and specific if you don't want to be. And if it benefits your seller, you can be. It really depends on what is going to be the best benefit to your seller. And if you're just saying highest and best, I don't think that is going to be the best benefit for your seller. Because if I have a client who comes in and says, I want this house, but I don't want to overbid by 20,000 if I don't have to, but I'm willing to. And they just tell me, submit your highest and best. And they have somebody that's 20,000 over, my client's willing to go 25 or 30,000 over. Well, how do I know? And now you could get more for your seller because my client is willing, but because we don't know, we're not going to submit this high offer just because. And then of course, in that case, you can do escalation clauses and all of that kind of thing. But just as an aside, my personal feeling on that is I almost never think that the best option for your listing client is to say, submit your highest and best. I think that's kind of a lazy way to do it. I hope that helped. And don't forget, we're here live every Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Join me live to get your questions answered in real time by registering at the link in the description below. Let's keep building, growing, and closing those deals. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share this with another agent who needs this. You've got this, and I've got you. And I'll see you in the next video.